Hey everyone, welcome to the video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Solomon Thomas. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I just got my master's in psychology and I have the goal of becoming a clinical psychologist one day. So I'm making these YouTube videos for two reasons. One, I'm trying to practice public speaking and I'm also trying to practice clarifying my thoughts. And the second reason is that I just hope that these ideas that I present can be useful or interesting to anyone out there who's listening. So in this video, I wanted to talk about how to become a better listener. And when I thought about how to answer that question, three principles came to mind. First, set your goal to understand the other person when you're engaging in a conversation rather than trying to be right. The second principle is to embrace your ignorance. And the third principle is more of a practice, which is called active listening, coined by the American psychotherapist Carl Rogers, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. So, the first principle, set your goal or set your aim to genuinely want to understand the other person when you're engaging in a conversation. Now, when we're talking about listening, the ability to attend to the full meaning that another person is trying to convey to you, we probably first should notice that oftentimes when we think we're listening, what we're actually doing is thinking about our future response. So when someone is conversing with you and trying to communicate something of meaning, there are many layers of complexity that come together to make up the message. There are the words, yes, but there's also the tone in which they say those words. There's the melody, there's the greater context, there's the physical mannerisms, there's the facial expressions. There's so much that is communicated primarily implicitly and unconsciously, but those factors are still important. And so oftentimes we are listening to someone and we are hearing the words, but because our attentional capacity is so limited, we are focused partly just on the words, but we ignore all of those other aspects. And then we fill the rest of our attention with our own thoughts about what we're going to say next, our internal emotional reactions perhaps to what they're saying, or we're thinking about something completely differently. Listening can really break down and become difficult when we are engaged in heated debates or arguments with someone that you love. And that's really when we start to lose the path. We start to focus more on making ourselves look better, or sometimes we focus on dominating the other person and winning the argument. And this is when the conversation shifts from something that's collaborative and maybe fun and productive, where you're both trying to solve a problem, to something that's more competitive, and the search and the goal is no longer for truth, but it is to win. And winning is not the same thing as making progress in a relationship, which is one of the goals, or could be one of the goals of having a relationship and engaging in dialogue in the first place. So it's important to keep in mind that when you are listening to someone, there's a lot of complexity, a lot of information in what they are communicating, and you need to bring all of yourself, all of your cognitive capacity, for lack of better terms, to fully grasp what it is that they're trying to say. And it's difficult to do that when you're thinking, I want to be right, or I just want to get through this conversation. There's something better that I have going on. So the first principle is set your goal to understand the other person rather than trying to be right, or rather than trying to dominate them, or rather than trying to make yourself look better. So the second principle that I would highlight in terms of trying to become a better listener is to just embrace your ignorance. I found in my experience when listening to different people, whether it's my wife or I work with kids who have autism, or when I'm listening to my professor, if I start from a place of humility and I acknowledge that there are so many things that I don't know in this world, I then think that it's quite likely that this person can teach me something that I don't know, even if it just relates to their perspective on a situation. Oftentimes, what can hinder our ability to listen and engage in a genuine dialogue that's productive is our arrogance, our lack of humility. We think we already know what the person's going to say. We think we already understand the situation, and so as they're going on, say, their 5 minute monologue, or as they're talking to you, you kind of shut off halfway through because you think you already understand what's going to happen. And now we go back to our first principle where we fail in that first principle, and now we're just thinking about how we're going to respond next. So I think it's also important to start off with a stance of humility and understand that there are many things that you don't know, and that that's okay. And that's probably a big reason why you're engaging in the dialogue in the first place, so that you can learn something. So with that, we can bring the first two principles of seeking to understand the other person and embracing your ignorance together in a practice that's called active listening. As I mentioned, this is a term that was coined by Carl Rogers. Also, many of these ideas and many of the things I'm talking about in this video were inspired by Carl Rogers, so highly recommend that anyone check out some of his books if you're interested in some of these ideas that I'm talking about. But to actively listen to someone is to attend to all of those different layers of information that I elucidated at the beginning of the video. When people are communicating a message, their meaning is deeper and more than the words. So to actively listen to someone is to attend to all of those factors. And more than that, it is to summarize the meaning or your interpretation of the meaning that was conveyed by the other person back to them in a manner that they deem is valid. So you're having a conversation with someone, even if it's a heated debate, and they're going on a spiel for about 5 minutes. Before you respond, to practice active listening, what you'll do is you'll say, okay, I think you said this. And then you lay out your interpretation of what you think you heard. And it's only when the other person says, yes, you understand what I'm saying, that you can then give your response. When you engage in a conversation with the intent to actively listen, you can't pay attention to your own thoughts without inhibiting that capacity. So you are forced to set the goal of trying to understand the other person and open yourself up to all of the different forms of communication and different signals that they're going to be presenting to you. And it also helps keep you humble and remind you of your ignorance, because as you're listening to them, you have the question, how am I going to best summarize what this person is saying? And by asking that question, by keeping that in mind, you are admitting some sort of ignorance. So active listening is very helpful. It also can help make the conversation go more smoothly and be more productive, particularly as it can help decrease the temperature and prevent people from getting defensive. If I'm in a heated debate with someone and they give me 2 or 3 of their points for their argument, if I immediately start responding to them in a maybe attacking way and going on the offense, or I'm accusing them of something, that runs the risk of just increasing the tension and then decreasing the productivity that could happen from the dialogue. But if I first ask them a question, meaning, is this summary of what you were saying correct? It lets them know that I'm not necessarily trying to compete with them. I am at least first trying to get a genuine understanding of what they're saying. And that also communicates to them that I'm trying to empathize with them and I'm trying to learn from this conversation, compared to if I were to just go straight into the next line of points that I had and just respond to them. And again, what active listening does when you are practicing this diligently, particularly in heated conversations, is that it helps you learn. When the other person is speaking, sometimes they might not know what they're trying to say. And so it could be very well that you definitely don't know what they're saying. And so when you take that time to rehash out what was just said, you spend more attention and more time trying to flush out what is being communicated. That helps both parties, because the other person might say, "Oh, okay, I know I said X, but really I meant Y." Or they might even say, "Oh, I actually didn't know that there was a contradiction here. That's interesting. Let me think about it some more." So when it comes to being a better listener, I think the best practical tip is to practice summarizing what the other person said before you respond to any of their points. So to recap, part of what I wanted to try and do in this video is to just talk about how to be a better listener. And if we take the opposite view of the three principles I just spoke about, being a bad listener is something like wanting to always be right, engaging in a conversation so that way you can dominate the other person or make them look bad instead of trying to learn, having a stance of arrogance and hubris where you think you already know everything, so why do you need to listen to anyone anyway if you already know everything, and then paying more attention to your own thoughts and your own future responses rather than trying to think about what the other person is actually communicating. So, to be a better listener, set the goal of trying to genuinely understand what the other person is saying, embrace your ignorance, and try to practice humility when you're engaging in these conversations. And then finally, focus on summarizing what the other person said to the degree that they accept your interpretation before you give your response. So that's the video. Thanks everyone for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.